Hello everyone and welcome back to our reading of The Swiss Family Robinson. Today's chapter, Home Again. Let's get started. At early dawn, our picturesque caravan began moving homeward. The ostrich continued so refractory that we were obliged to make him again march between Storm and Grumble. And as these gallant steeds were thus employed, the cow was harnessed to the cart, laden with our treasures. Room was left in the cart for the mother. Jack and Franz mounted Storm and Grumble, I rode Lightfoot, and Fritz brought up the rear on Swift. At the mouth of the gap, we called a halt, and replaced the cord the boys had strung with ostrich feathers by a stout palisade of bamboos. When we reached the sugarcane grove, we again stopped to collect the peccary hams we had left to be smoked, and my wife begged me to gather some seeds of an aromatic plant which grew in the neighborhood, and which had the scent of vanilla. I obtained a good supply, and we moved forward toward Woodlands, where we intended to rest for the night, after our long and fatiguing march. Our tent was pitched, and on our beds of cotton we slept soundly. Next morning, early we examined our farmyard, which appeared in a most prosperous and flourishing condition. The sight of all these domestic animals made us long even more than ever for our home at Rockburg, and we determined to hasten thither with all possible speed. The number of our pigs, goats, and poultry had greatly increased since we had last visited our colony, and some of these two fine breeds of chickens especially, my wife wished to take back with her. We found that the herd of antelopes which Fritz and Jack had driven through the gap had taken up their abode in the neighborhood, and several times we saw the beautiful animals browsing among the trees. While at the farm, we repaired both the animals' stalls and our dwelling room, and the former might be more secure against the attacks of wild beasts, and the latter fitted for our accommodation when we should visit the spot. Everything at length being satisfactorily arranged, we again retired to rest, and early next morning completed our journey to Rockburg. By midday, we were once more settled at home. Windows and doors were thrown open to admit fresh air, the animals established in their stalls, and the cart's miscellaneous cargo discharged and arranged. As much time as I could spare, I devoted to the ostrich, whom we fastened, for the present, between two bamboo posts in front of our dwelling. Next morning, Fritz and I went off in the boat, first to Rail Island, there to establish our colonists, the Angora rabbits, then to Shark Island, where we placed the dainty little antelopes. Having made them happy with their liberty and abundance of food, we returned as quickly as possible to cure the bearskins and add the provisions we had brought to the stores lying in our cellar. As we returned, we caught up Jack making his way in great glee toward Rockburg. He was carrying in a basket an immense eel which he and Ernest had secured. Ernest had set on the previous night a couple of lines. One had been dragged away, but on the other they found this splendid fellow. It proved delicious. Half was prepared for dinner, and the other half salted and stowed away. We now, for a short time, again turned our attention to our duties about the house. Thinking that the veranda would be greatly improved by some creepers, I sowed round the root of each bamboo pillar vanilla and pepper seed, as well as that of other creeping plants, which would not only give the house a pleasanter aspect, but also afford us shade during the summer months. I constructed a couple of hen coops, too, for the hens and the little chicks which we had brought from woodlands, for I knew that if I left them unprotected, the inquisitive dispositions of Nips and Fangs might induce them to make anatomical experiments which would be detrimental to the welfare of the youngsters. Ernest's rat skins were voted a nuisance within doors, and were tied together and hung up outside. So powerful was the odor they emitted that even then Jack would pretend to faint every time he passed near them. The museum received its addition. The condor and vulture were placed there to be stuffed when we should find time during the rainy season. Having occupied 2 days in this way, we turned our attention to other duties, the cultivation of a wheat, barley, and maize field, and the taming of the captive. As agriculture was, though the least to our taste, the most important of these several duties, we set about it first. The animals drew the plow, but the digging and hoeing taxed our powers of endurance to the utmost. We worked 2 hours in the morning, and 2 in the evening. Fully did we realize the words of Scripture, and the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread. In the interval, we devoted our attention to the ostrich, but our efforts on behalf of his education seemed all in vain. He appeared as untamable as ever. I determined, therefore, to adopt the plan which had subdued the refractory eagle. The effect of the tobacco fumes almost alarmed me. The ostrich sank to the ground and lay motionless. Slowly, at length, he arose and paced up and down between the bamboo posts. He was subdued, but to my dismay, resolutely refused all food. I feared he would die. For 3 days he pined, growing weaker and weaker each day. "Food he must have," said I to my wife. "Food he must have." The mother determined to attempt an experiment. She prepared balls of maize flour mixed with butter. One of these she placed within the bird's beak. He swallowed it and stretched out his long neck, looking inquiringly for a second mouthful. A second, third, and fourth ball followed the first. His appetite returned, and his strength came again. All the wild nature of the bird had gone, and I saw with delight that we might begin his education as soon as we chose. Rice, guavas, maize, and corn he ate readily, washing it down, as Jack expressed it, with small pebbles, to the great surprise of Franz, to whom I explained that the ostrich was merely following the instinct common to all birds, that he required these pebbles to digest his food, just as smaller birds required gravel. After a month of careful training, our captive would trot, gallop, obey the sound of our voice, feed from our hand, and in fact showed himself perfectly docile. Now, our ingenuity was taxed to the utmost. How were we to saddle and bridle a bird? First, a bit was needed for his beak. Vague ideas passed through my mind, but everyone I was obliged to reject. A plan at length occurred to me. I recollected the effect of light, and its absence upon the ostrich. How his movements were checked by sudden darkness, and how with the light power returned to his limbs. I immediately constructed a leathern hood to reach from the neck to the beak, cutting holes in it for the eyes and ears. Over the eye holes I contrived square flaps or blinkers, which were so arranged with railbone springs that they closed tightly of themselves. The reins were connected with these blinkers so that the flaps might be raised or allowed to close at the rider's pleasure. When both blinkers were open, the ostrich would gallop straight ahead, close his right eye, and he turned to the left, closed his left eye, and he turned to the right, shut both, and he stood stock still. I was justly proud of my contrivance, but before I could really test its utility, I was obliged to make a saddle. After several failures, I succeeded in manufacturing one to my liking, and in properly securing it. It was something like an old-fashioned trooper's saddle. Peaked before and behind from my great fear was lest the boy should fall. This curious-looking contrivance I placed upon the shoulders as near the neck as possible, and secured it with strong girths round the rings and across the breast, to avoid all possibility of the saddle slipping down the bird's sloping back. I soon saw that my plan would succeed, though skill and considerable practice were necessary in the use of my patent bridle. It was difficult to remember that to check the courser's speed it was necessary to slacken rein, and that the tighter the reins were drawn, the faster he would fly. We at length, however, all learned to manage Master Hurricane, and the distance between Rockburg and Falconhurst was traversed in an almost incredibly short space of time. The marvelous speed of the bird again revived the dispute as to the ownership, and I was obliged to interfere. Jack shall retain the ostrich, said I, for it is most suited to him. He is a lighter weight than either of you. His elder brothers and friends is not yet strong enough to manage such a fleet courser. But he is so far to be considered common property, that all may practice on him occasionally, and, in a case of necessity, anyone may mount him. Our field work was by this time over. The land had been ploughed and sown with wheat, barley, and maize. On the other side of Jackal River, we had planted potatoes and cassava roots, and all sorts of other seeds had been carefully sown. I now found time to turn my attention to the bear's skins, which required preparation before they would be fit for use as leather. They had been salted and dried, and now required tanning. I had no tan, however. This was unfortunate, but not to be deterred from my purpose, I determined to use a mixture of honey and water in its place. The experiment proved successful. When the skins were dried, they remained flexible and free from smell, while the fur was soft and glossy. As our cellar was now round stocked with provisions for the winter and our other preparations were completed, I was able to turn my attention to details of lesser importance. The boys had been clamoring for hats, and as my success in so many trades had surprised me, I agreed to turn hatter for the nonce. With the rat skins and a solution of India rubber, I produced a kind of felt which I dyed a brilliant red with some cochineal I had found on one of our excursions, and stretching this on a wooden block I had prepared, I passed over it a hot iron to smooth the nap, and by next morning had the satisfaction of presenting to my wife a neat little red Swiss cap, to be lined and finished by her for one of the boys. The mother admired the production immensely, and lining it with silk, added yet more to its gay appearance by adorning it with ribbons and ostrich feathers, and finally placed it upon the head of little Franz. So delighted was everyone with the hat that all were eager to be similarly provided, and begged me to manufacture more. I readily agreed to do so as soon as they should furnish me with the necessary materials, and advised them to make half a dozen rat traps, that they might secure the water rats, with which the stream abounded, and whose rich glossy fur would serve admirably for felt. Every fifth animal that they brought me I told them should be mine, that I might obtain material for hats for myself and their mother. The boys at once agreed to this arrangement, and began the manufacture of the traps which were all so made that they should kill the rats at once, for I could not bear the idea of animals being tortured or imprisoned. And that would be all for today. I'll see you all next time. See ya!